Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the Finding You podcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, November 18th, 2025. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about the role of the hero, the hero's role in the family system. But really, as I prepared this presentation, this podcast, I really found myself talking about the scapegoat, the identified patient, and that's the same person oftentimes. Oftentimes, the hero starts off as the scapegoat, starts off as the identified patient. So whether you're in a situation where you're parenting a struggling child, or I think a lot of folks that listen into the Finding You podcast see themselves and their own family of origin issues as the focus, you might be that person who has filled that role in your family growing up. And what's likely is you're going to fill that role in any system, any group of people that you get into in your life. So the hero in the family and how it originates, where it comes from, how it develops, and how ultimately we can get out of that role. And I'll be talking about several things related to that. Before I get into that, let me talk about the upcoming information and announcements. The Finding You Inner Circle has launched. So if you are an alumni of the Finding You programs, you're automatically enrolled. If not, you can attend these live, which includes the Ask Me Anything episodes. You can interact with me during those. And what you do is you pay $10 a month or $100 a year, and you can cancel at any time. So that's for the Finding You podcast. It is a subscription and a support of the Finding You podcast. If you are interested in doing your own work, or if you're already doing your own work and you would feel like you could use something to accelerate the work, Finding You Intensives is that offering. The next available offering is December 3rd through 7th. If anybody's considering it, this is well placed right in the middle of the holidays. So, like Ram Dass says, if you think you're enlightened, spend a week with your family. This is a time when most of us are going to have our family roles challenged or provoked, right? We're going to experience that regression that comes when we gather together as family. So December 3rd is that next available offering. We have a spot available in that intensive. And if you don't know this or you haven't heard, Emma Reedy June and her husband Jordan June are going to be running this. Emma's my daughter, and I have heard many people say that working with Emma is the greatest thing in the world. And I've watched it, I've seen it. So if you're interested, if you've heard me talk about Emma, if you've heard others talk about Emma, this is an opportunity to attend her Finding You led intensive, December 3rd through 7th. Then we have intensives each month after that, January 7th, February 4th, and March 4th. These go from a Wednesday afternoon to a Sunday afternoon. So you can leave home on Wednesday and you can get back home on Sunday. If you're interested in a private intensive for a couple or for families or any other inquiries, you can go to our website or you can email us at our email address, which is info@findingyouprograms.com. That's info@findingyouprograms.com. We are now hosting a monthly support group for the alumni of our intensives. The next offering is tomorrow night, November 19th. So if you're interested, contact us on using that email. Get a hold of us as soon as possible so you can register and get the link for attending November 19th. And the email again is info@findingyouprograms.com. If you're looking for a coach or a therapist who works within this model, which is basically, for those of you who don't know this model, it's psychoanalytically conceptualized, but really it is whole, it's eclectic. Anything that works, right? That's what psychoanalysis would suggest to you, is anything that you believe in is what cures. Anything works. So we use psychodrama, we use art therapy, we use, of course, coaching and psychotherapy to do it, but it's attachment-based, family of origin-based, psychoanalytically informed. I'm so happy to announce that I'll be back at the Omega Institute this coming July. I just finished a week-long class. I'm going to be repeating that class. We're calling it The Audacity to Be You. Learn to love your horrible, rotten self. And I will just say to you that my expectations of the workshop were exceeded. And as I listened to people talk about their experience, I was surprised to find that many of them talked about it being transformative in the exact same ways that they talk about our intensives. And this is incredibly affordable. So this is at the Omega Institute in the Hudson Valley in New York. It is in the summer. It's about $500, give or take, depending upon if you're a member or not. And being a member is not a big ask. So if you're interested, go to the Omega website at eomega.org. You can contact them, or of course, go to our website, contact us, and we'll help you get signed up. My two books that are out, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible, and very soon to be released, My third book, Stay in the Room, about how a religious Mormon family came together after the adult son came out as gay. So they write their story and I write the therapeutic work that's involved in that. So if you are interested in that topic, that'll be coming out in the next few weeks. Look forward to that. All right, let's get into tonight's content. Let's get into it. In families where unspoken traumas linger, one child often emerges as the unwitting lightning rod, absorbing the family's unresolved shadows. Labeled as the scapegoat or identified patient, this child bears the weight of the collective denial, provoking anger and blame from those unwilling to confront their own wounds. Yet in their struggle, this child might catalyze a profound transformation, leading the family toward therapy and healing, ultimately becoming the hero that guides them out of the wilderness and into consciousness. What begins as a burden wrapped in the most unappealing packages often becomes the greatest gift, inviting each member to confront their own darkness and embrace the path to wholeness together. So when I talk about the hero today, I'm not talking about that role that is sometimes identified as the hero where you have to be the one that's the good one. You have to be the one that's the accomplished one. I'm talking about genuinely something heroic that occurs when the identified patient is finally responded to by the rest of the family with a willingness on their part to get in and do their unresolved, undealt with work, to face the projections of their own lack of serenity and its cause, instead of projecting that onto the child. So oftentimes the scapegoat, the identified patient, is the most sensitive person in the system. It's the person that speaks truth to power. It's the person that makes the implicit explicit. And it's the person that makes the most waves. And oftentimes, because this burden is such a heavy burden to carry, and because the people in the family with power, i.e. the parents, are unwilling to hear the message from the scapegoat, the message is delivered through symptoms, mental health symptoms, addictions. So what starts off as an identified patient and a family's attempt to cure the identified patient of their depression, of their anxiety, of their substance use or substance addiction becomes an entire family process. And I would say in almost every case where I've worked with families, where the families have put in some effort to understanding their role, their participation in the family issue, they have come away with a gratitude for what the scapegoat, the identified patient, the hero, has brought them into, to greater consciousness, to greater awareness. So if you're one of those people who in groups, you're the one who wants to talk about what's not being talked about, you have no stomach for ignoring the elephant in the room, you don't bear very well the weight of unexpressed emotions, you're the one who tends to feel the emotions that the group isn't overtly expressing or talking about, then this is for you. This is your opportunity to see your place in the family and to see how you serve the family. A couple of quotes about this process. Recovering from family scapegoating requires recognizing that being the identified patient is symptomatic of generations of systemic dysfunction with one's family, fueled by unrecognized anxiety and even trauma. In a certain sense, members of a dysfunctional family are participating in a consensual trance. For example, this survival trance supported by false narratives, toxic shame, anxiety, and ego defense mechanisms, such as denial and projections. And to go on, a family scapegoat is burdened with criticism, toxic shame, and blame for something that they have not done. The wrongdoings of others are projected onto them, or more accurately, into them. You are a convenient receptacle for your insecure family members who are incapable or unwilling to take responsibility for their own actions, words, and behaviors. The first quote is from Rebecca Mandeville, and the second one is from Dana Arcuri. So I want to give them credit. So this idea that we have that the identified patient is the one with the problem, right? This old model from the mental health field has been essentially debunked for decades. But it's the resistance that we have as a society, as a culture, to kind of hold this model to the light is because we don't want to own our own stuff. We want the problem to be somebody else's responsibility. And when you think about in the context of a parent and a child, maybe even in the context of you being the child in that equation, that dynamic, your heart breaks for the child, doesn't it? Because the child is merely manifesting the symptomology of the underlying dynamics that the family is unwilling to look at. And because they lack power in many cases, there are unwilling participants, or at least reluctant participants in this process. Sometimes even birth order studies show that it's the second born, right? The rebel often, who performs this duty, this role, this service for the family. In birth order studies, we see the firstborn child typically, right? It's not universal, of course, but the one, the overt hero, the one who identifies with the values of the most dominant parent in the family, or the parents as a whole, right? They subscribe to and believe in and carry the torch for the family's overt values, education, right? Whatever it is. But then comes the secondborn. And the secondborn happens to be positioned in such a way that they will often really attend to the implicit rules in the family, not the explicit rules. And they will try to make those implicit rules, roles, energies, messages explicit. And because they lack the resources, right, the development, that communication of those issues will often come out symptomatically, in symptoms. And what's I think more insidious about this process is with each symptom or each display of the symptom, the child is further shamed, further projected onto. You know, when family members come to me and say, my son is angry at me, among other things, or my daughter is angry at me, among other things, among the many mental health symptoms, I will often say to families, to parents, your child's anger towards you is not an indication whatsoever of their mental health. It is independent of their mental health. And what I mean by that is they could be perfectly healthy. And the anger that they are expressing, exhibiting, is stuck in this kind of loop because no one's hearing it, because nothing is changing, because nobody has the capacity to hold space for the child and what they're feeling and even respond to it. So the goal in this work is to ask yourself, if you're the parent, what's my part? That's really the ultimate heroic task, is to ask yourself the question, what part do I have in this dynamic, of which I have many complaints, but unconsciously I'm contributing to the very thing that I'm complaining about. And a child's anger toward a parent really bears no relation, no correlation to their mental health. Healthy children can be very angry, and unhealthy children can be very not angry at their parents. In fact, compliance and cooperation are one of the most subtle and insidious forms of resistance to waking up to consciousness. And one of the reasons is because it gets reinforced by others. Something I wrote a while back. In our quest for peace of mind, we often project our inner turmoil onto those we love, asking them to bear the weight of our unresolved fears and unacknowledged sins, primarily the sin of unconsciousness. This mirrors the ancient ritual described in the Old Testament, where the scapegoat is sent into the wilderness, laden with the transgressions of the community. As Carl Jung might suggest, this act of displacing our shadows onto another not only burdens them, but also perpetuates our own inner disquiet. Until the shadow is integrated into the personality, the world appears filled with opponents and adversaries who are actually products of the unconscious. This is actually Jung talking now. When we fail to confront our own darkness, we inadvertently ask others to carry that which we refuse to acknowledge. Thus, let us not turn our kin into scapegoats, for their journey is not to bear our sins, but to walk alongside us in the pursuit of wholeness. So, this idea tonight is really about understanding that a lot of the things that you might feel in your body, feel in certain situations, that agitate you, that upset you, that if you don't have a place or a way or the skill set or the resources to communicate them assertively, will ultimately manifest themselves in symptoms. Sometimes the symptom is a physical symptom, like disease, autoimmune disorders, and so forth. And sometimes it looks more behavioral or like a mental health issues. But the task for everybody in the family is to bear the weight of their own shadow. One of my favorite stories that I wrote about in the journey of the heroic parent is this one. Salvador Minuchin, a pioneer in family therapy, staged an intervention that I have borrowed many times. He was treating children and adolescents at the Philadelphia Child Guidance Clinic. After an initial session with the family, he invited them to participate in the following ritual on the way home. Stop off and have an ice cream, he would tell them. Buy your daughter any ice cream she wants. And tell her she is fired. Fired from being the identified patient. Tell her that no matter how healthy she gets, that you will work on yourself, your parenting, your communication, and your listening. End of quote. So the idea here in this assignment was to make it clear to the family that the symptoms that were being presented, complained about, brought in for the therapist to cure, were not necessarily the problem, or at least not the root problem. But rather those symptoms were a message, right? Coded in symbol and metaphor and behavior to communicate to the family that something for the child is not working. Something in the lineage of this family that has been passed down needs to stop in order for this child and for future children to have their suffering reduced. So the question is tonight, are you one of these people? Did you inadvertently, like I did, even with this knowledge? By the way, I had this knowledge before I had children because I was the scapegoat, the identified patient, the hero child in the end. I was the one who asked my family to work on themselves, but both overtly and through the behavior. I was the one that pointed out the hypocrisy and the ignorance, the unconsciousness in our family. I would be the one to talk about things that we weren't supposed to talk about, to feel things that we weren't supposed to feel. And even with all of that experience and background, I still, in some ways, perpetuated this cycle to my children. Because you see, I believed, like so many parents, well, I had the experience, of course, of loving my children. And I believed that my children's dangerous, unhealthy, risky behavior that concerned me that they might not turn out to be a responsible citizen, a successful person. I believed that those behaviors in my children were the things that were causing my unhappiness, my anxiety, my worry, and my fear. And it's taken me an untold number of therapy sessions, interventions, to figure out that I am the cause of my own suffering. And that my job was to develop the capacity, the awareness, the consciousness, so that I could bring that to bear in my child's relationship, that I could bring my more healed, my regulated nervous system to bear for the child. But because I didn't own the fear, the anxiety, the worry, because I made my children responsible for those things, I essentially took my undone work and transferred it to them. And in many ways, that is something that I'll always have some regret for, some sadness and some grief about. I did something to interrupt some of the cycles from my parents and from my grandparents and my ancestors. But there's still more work to do, as there will be for my children and the children that they have. In family systems theory, we talk about these roles. We talk about the fact that as tension and anxiety develops in families, that it often gets coded, it gets presented, it gets manifested in various dynamics and relationships, marital conflict, of course, dysfunction in one spouse. A spouse can become the scapegoat. Impairment in one of the or more of the children. That's what I'm talking about a lot tonight. Emotional distance, struggle with boundaries. Scapegoats, identified patients, eventually heroes of the family, are often the most sensitive members of the family. They feel the most. Right? One of my children said to me not too long ago. She said to me, I don't think you understand how big, how powerful the feelings in my body are felt. What you suggest is just a mild emotion that I probably could get over or should get over is something extraordinarily painful to me. And that could be because of some attachment issues, but that also is because I believe my daughter, like myself, has a very sensitive nervous system. I was telling a client today, for the first 40 years of my life, I didn't think I was sensitive. I didn't talk about myself as an adult, at least, in terms of being sensitive. I thought I was pretty tough. I thought I'd, recovered from a pretty difficult childhood. I'd been in therapy for many years. And I considered myself one of the tough ones. Now at 57 years old, you'll find me often saying I'm very sensitive. And that is a wonderful gift as a father, as a spouse, and as a psychotherapist. But it's also a burden in many of those relationships. So the scapegoat, the identified patient, the heroes are sensitive, implicitly sensitive, inherently sensitive. They want to make what is implicit explicit. They have no stomach for elephants in the room, for the unspoken messages, for the hypocrisies, for the unconsciousness. That idea that we, as we grow, will expose the immaturity and the undone work of our parents is here. These individuals suffer in family systems where speaking truth to power is punished. My therapist used to tell me a story all the time about how her son would speak to her with a lot of anger. And the people around my therapist would say to her, "Why do you allow your son to talk to you this way?" And she would say to them, "Who else do I want him to talk to about this?" See, it becomes our job. It was our parents' job, whether they knew it or not, to develop the psychological resources, wherewithal, skills, but most importantly, the base of a regulated nervous system so that they could take in our emotions, our behaviors, metabolize it because of the greater resources that ideally were available to them. That is their life experience, their knowledge, their wisdom. You take in the child's, it's like when one of my children was caught shoplifting. And I have an awareness that most people I've known have shoplifted at least once in their life, and they didn't end up to be serial criminals, sociopaths. So instead of wringing my hands and being upset and handing that to my child, I had a perspective. I was able to execute an appropriately sized consequence and really reflect to my daughter that this is going to be a problem if you make it one. She said to me some years later, she said, when I was struggling in my early teens, she told me, she said, you and mom acted like I was doing it to you. And I'll tell you, I very much communicated it to her that she was doing it to me. One of my most common mistakes. You're hurting me. You're upsetting me. You're embarrassing me. I'm not proud of those messages, but they were there. So I said to her when she said that to me some years later, I said, you're absolutely right. It's hard to believe, back then that I made such mistakes about me, that I, due to my own lack of awareness, my own lack of consciousness, my own lack of development, talked about a child's mistakes, a child's behavior as a personal assault on me. These individuals, these heroes, these scapegoats may act out this distress that they feel, like I mentioned, through mental health symptoms. Carl Jung said that whatever is rejected from the self, whatever we don't deal with, in other words, appears in the world as an event. I've said this recently a few times. My therapist has referred to projections in my psychotherapy many times over the years. And I used to think early on in our therapy, doesn't she have another idea, another tool, another skill, another concept to share with me? It seems projection is her one trick. She's this one trick pony. Now, years later, I realize how much of life is about projection. That's really what Don Miguel Ruiz's Four Agreements, the one that says don't take it personally, is about. What other people think about you is not about you. How other people treat you is not about you. That's the principle at the basis of the Al-Anon slogan, which says, what other people think about me is none of my business. Or my serenity is my responsibility. If we don't realize that we are the ones causing our own suffering, we will project that onto our children. That's what happened to us. That's why we carry so much shame and fear in our bodies. Because we were made to believe, led to believe, that the concern, the consternation that our parents felt for the mistakes that we were making were an assault on them. That we were doing to them this thing, that we were making them unhappy, making them upset. It is their background, their lack of awareness, their lack of perspective that was causing their suffering. It was their accepting the wrong answers to life's and psychology's most important questions that caused their suffering, not us. It was their over-identification with us that caused their suffering, not us. So when we project onto other people our suffering, we say that the world is a horrible place and that's why we're so unhappy and anxious. It's not the world's fault. I have someone tell me 2 or 3 times a week in session how distressing the world events are. And I don't know what they're talking about, mostly because I don't listen to the news. Because I can't afford to. I can't afford to listen to the news at any length. It costs me too much in terms of my serenity, and I have very little to give to my family, to my clients. So the news that is meant to scare you, which it is meant to scare you, it's meant to frighten you. Doesn't matter which side of the aisle you're on and which side of the aisle you're listening to. It is meant to upset you and scare you, to suggest to you that you have to tune in, that if you're uninformed, that it's going to go even crazier, and that somehow your viewership of the news is causing the world to turn on its axis in a better way. So we project onto the world, we project onto others, we project on to people that we see, people that we're related to, the cause of our suffering. Triangulation is a related principle where instead of dealing with conflict, we talk to somebody else about it. Gossip, right? Instead of a couple being able to sort out their intimacy issues, they make the child the problem, right? Instead of working out their co-parenting conflict, they focus on the child. The identified patient is the most sensitive one in the system, the one manifesting the dysfunction of the system within their body. Part of this is due to the inherent sensitivity of their nervous systems. Part of this is because they have had projected onto them the quote-unquote badness from others. They become the most symptomatic. And what they serve in the system is a function similar to the scapegoat. Then everybody else can look at themselves in the mirror and see a good person looking back because they're not struggling like the scapegoat. They're not the one with the substance use issue. They're not the one with the anger, as if anger is a sign of a mental health problem. Anger is just anger, right? They look in the mirror and see a good person because they've taken the badness, denied it, and projected it onto others. Sometimes called a lightning rod or a scapegoat, they ultimately become the hero. In family systems treatment, we often think of the car accident analogy. When somebody gets in a car accident, a family gets in a car accident, we don't just treat the driver of the accident while they might be at fault. We treat the entire family. We would think it insane if in the emergency room, all that was treated was the driver. And yet we do the same thing in families all the time. We treat the one that has become the lightning rod. Everybody needs help. And if this theory is true, that the scapegoat, the identified patient, is manifesting the symptoms of the family, then why not start at the root instead of the symptom? Our children stretch us and scare us, but ultimately they ask us to look inward. Our children and their struggles are a formal invitation to the hero's journey. And the hero's journey is a looking inward. We talk about codependency or co-participation. I want to be clear about codependency. Codependency is not unique to families with substance use issues or addiction. I've seen some pretty functional alcoholics. And I've seen families, of course, growing up in the community in Utah that I have lived in for the past 30 years, 40 years. I've seen a lot of families with virtually no overt substance use or abuse who are very codependency. Codependency is an attachment issue. Codependency is not taking responsibility for your own serenity. Codependency is looking for problems out there. Try to control something outside of you, people, places, or things outside of you, to sort out an internal feeling of a lack of serenity, a lack of peace, to try to quell the fear that lives inside of us. But what happens when the identified patient or the scapegoat pulls the family into treatment and everybody starts doing their work? The identified patient then has no reason to carry the family symptomology and sins. They're free to live their own life. So as the family gets restructured, learns communication skills, learns some of the principles, that's where this podcast actually originally came from, was to give the non-identified patients something to think about during the week in our program. When I gave a presentation many years ago on intervention with a good friend of mine who's an interventionist. And one of the principles that we talked about clearly was the intervention is on the family. The outcome of the identified patient enrolling themselves in therapy is one of the benefits and the perks of the intervention. But the intervention is to reorganize the family away from, or to stop it from being intertwined with the identified patient's behavior, and to work on it separately. My daughter has come up with this 3-stage model of development. And I love what she said. She said, when we start off young, we start off with the idea of I am bad. And then we move to you are bad, right? The problem is out there. You'll recognize that in adolescence with your adolescent children, or maybe in your own adolescence. But eventually, we get to the place that we're all human. And what Emma points out is you kind of have to go through the steps. So when the child is blaming the world for everything, we can hold space for that. We can understand, we can empathize, we can even relate. But most of the time, we try to get the child to be enlightened. And when we try to get the angry child to be enlightened, you know what it sounds and feels like? It feels like gaslighting. Feels like not listening. Feels like not holding space. Feels like blaming. Feels like attacking. There's this idea in psychotherapy and systems theory called the drama triangle, where people take on certain roles in families, and these roles tend to become rigid and fixed. People lose their flexibility, their spontaneity. The three roles that they describe are the persecutor, the rescuer, and the victim. Notice in the chart that I've drawn, if you're watching live, that the persecutor and the rescuer are at the top of the triangle. The triangle is upside down if you're not watching. And they have this appearance of being more righteous, being more good. That the victim is the bad one. The victim, the scapegoat, the identified patient often is the bad one. The persecutor's message is it's all your fault. And how many parents take on this role of persecutor? Blaming, setting strict limits that are arbitrary, critical, keeps the victim oppressed, calls the victim a victim. You'll never hear me talk about the victim in psychotherapy. Never even think about it. Because really, all of these roles are victims. Being the persecutor or the rescuer has in it a justification that is akin to being the victim. The persecutor is often anger or activated by anger. It often is rigid and autocratic, avoids self-evaluation, right? This is the narcissistic presentation. And the one thing that the narcissists can't do is look at themselves, their own faults and flaws. They can't see them in themselves. It's too threatening. They avoid self-evaluations. They don't own their part. When they are hurt or overwhelmed, and they don't even experience it as hurt or overwhelmed. They experience it as rage or anger and blame, calling other people selfish. They say things like, I don't have a problem. Think about if you've heard this from your parents or if you've said it as a parent. I've said this as a parent. I don't have a problem. They're responsible. They are responsible for my actions. They are broken, bad, stupid, inadequate. They are the problem. I don't have anything to work on in this situation. I have no other choice, right? The victim is the poor me energy. Feels victimized, oppressed, helpless, hopeless, powerless, ashamed. Looks for rescuers. In this role, which also I have embodied, I waited for years for the rescuer to come along. And nobody ever came. The only person who eventually came was me, a different version of me. The new, more evolved version of me became the person who rescued me from this dynamic. The victim avoids decision-solving problems, even pleasure and self-understanding. They take on a dejected stance. They say to others, you're the only one that can help me. They abandon me. They don't love me. If you don't agree with me and give me what I want, I won't feel love. They made me, fill in the blank. I have no choice. Notice that the first two have that same phrase, I have no choice. The rescuer, which many parents embody, let me help you, is the energy. They rescue when the other one doesn't even want to be rescued. Or maybe when it's not best for the other one to be rescued. Rescuers feel guilty if they don't rescue. It's a compulsion, right? Part of this work that I talk about is to become the observer of the feelings in your body, right? That's what somatic work can do for you. That's even what psychedelics can do for you. You can become the observer, more conscious. Instead of being the impulse, you can feel the impulse, notice it. Notice where it is in your body. So they feel guilty if they don't rescue, and they often feel compelled. It's often an automatic response. One of the perks for the rescue is that the victim becomes dependent on them, and that dependency gets miscategorized as love. I used to think that dependence was a form of love in my rescuer role. I thought if somebody needed me, they would never leave me. That assured that I would never be abandoned. The rescuer can be a marshmallow because they are people pleasers. blown by the wind, right? They don't have a core sense of self. A core belief that they hold is that my needs are not important and self-care is selfish. Often this leads into what people call the martyr role. The rescuer is not very good at asking for help. I can relate to that. Phrases like, I don't need anything. As a parent, I've always done everything out of love. My love will cure them. I can relate to that one so much. Of course they are struggling and can't make it. Look at all that has happened to them. All that I do for you. I would never treat someone else this way. And of course, I have no choice. You see how that's in all of them? These things become rigid. Lynn Forrest, who writes about this, explains that all three of these roles are actually victim stances, blaming others for the role that they assume. The persecutor externalizes blame and uses it to justify his or her attacks. The rescuer gets a sense of well-being by being the knight in shining armor, and of course has very few self-care skills. Like I've mentioned and alluded to with my own journey, people rotate among all the roles. All of these roles feed and generate shame. It's important, as always, to not try to fix this stuff first. That comes later. And in fact, this applies to virtually the vast majority of mental health symptoms. The first stage is acceptance. This is who I am. If you are entrenched in a rescuing role, you are not going to stop it no matter how much insight you have in the next 24, 48 hours. Not next week, not next month. It's going to be your life's work. And of course, like all mental health issues, you have a gift that is associated with this, right? You are caring. You are empathic. Your heart bleeds for people that are suffering. You are sensitive. So we learn the roles and our preferences, where we fit, what happened in our family of origin, what role we were asked to assume. And learning the starting gates. What Lynn is talking about, Lynn Force is talking about, is learning kind of what your go-to is. The starting gate position is the position that we occupy most comfortably, that we gravitate towards. Lynn explained that we can't get out of these roles, this triangle, unless we make it conscious. What hooks you? See, when I'm doing psychotherapy, what I really celebrate is when my client says, I realize this thing about myself, this horrible, rotten thing about myself. And it's not when they do it out of shame or self-hatred. It's when they do it out of strength and courage. When somebody says, I realize this, I'm a rescue. I realize that I'm a codependent. I realize this or that about myself. My response is great. And then they say, how do I get rid of it? And I always say, that comes much, much, much later down the road. First and foremost, you have to accept it. You have to sit with it. You have to understand it. You have to have compassion. You have to listen to it. What hooks you? Learning to identify your cycles and your roles without judgment. Identifying the pros, the cons, even the gifts of each role. And help the internal observer to recognize the impulses, the language, the behaviors of each role. So let me kind of wind toward the end. To acknowledge the shadows we cast upon our children is not to dwell in shame. I feel so strong about this. I'm going to read that sentence again. To acknowledge the shadows we cast upon our children is not to dwell in shame, but to embrace the truth of our shared humanity. As Jung wisely noted, the primary cause of neuroses often lies within the parental influence. This recognition transformed the burden of responsibility into an opportunity for healing and growth. By understanding the profound impact of our presence, we can guide our children towards wholeness, turning cycles of anxiety into journeys of compassion and understanding. I wrote about this in The Audacity to Be You, this experience. As we settled into the 4-day experience, each family member during an intensive was invited to create a psychodrama depicting what it felt like to grow up in their family of origin. I always invite the parents to go first, since their childhood experiences precede their children's, and one can visualize a virtual flowchart as each generation passes on trauma and healing and resources to the next. In this exercise, the parents' work is independent from their children's, which helps the identified patient see that the issues didn't start with them, and everyone is there to work on themselves. Courageous parents embrace this work, but in the back of their minds, they are often eagerly anticipating the work that will, quote unquote, fix the problem, fix the child. Everyone present has the honor to witness and feel what it might have been like to grow up and get cooked in the particular soup of the protagonist. Roles are reversed to create a dialogue, and the protagonist chooses whether their family member responds or would have back to them as they would, or whether they would like to have them respond as they would like now. Either way, the experience of telling the story to a group of witnesses is revealing and healing. And at the end of the family intensive, like the one I just previously mentioned, the parents walked away like so many before them with a clearer sense of their project. They were able to see how their fears and anxieties created a context where it was not safe for either of their children to tell the truth. And the children, after witnessing the real battle going on inside of their parents, were relieved at realizing that the entire problem was not about them. When this is realized, and when parents recognize what their project is, there's hope. There's hope because they can comprehend that they need to work on what they need to work on is within their control. And the identified patient or patients are relieved that they don't have to carry the parent's woundedness anymore, and that they are not alone in their journey of healing toward mental health healing. Until the shadow, the parts of us that we have repressed, that we have been taught that are unacceptable, that we have relegated to the unconscious in order to fit in, to make sure that we were loved by our parents or by the big people around us as children, until the shadow is integrated into the personality and accepted, the world appears filled with opponents or adversaries who are actually products of the unconscious. After this integration, people can be seen as individuals, even as people who disagree with us. James Hollis tells us that the most terrifying thing to accept is to accept oneself completely. This is the beginning of the healing process as we confront our shadows and integrate them into our whole being. You see, the work in the end is not about improving. That will happen as we do the work. The work is about self-compassion. The work is about learning to love the parts of ourselves that we have told to hate. The work is about developing a sense of safety enough in our body that we can be part of the problem without drowning in shame and guilt. That we can realize that we have hurt the people that we love the most in profound and fundamental ways. To develop the kind of courage and confidence, the kind of nervous system that is required to accept that truth is a profound realization. And in my experience, takes a significant amount of time, a significant amount of exposure to somebody who is different from our family, somebody who welcomed our anger, who welcomed us talking about the thing that we weren't supposed to talk about. In the end, everybody suffers. While the persecutor might look like they are the ones attacking the others, they too feel a tremendous disquiet in their soul, a tremendous lack of serenity. So we learn to take responsibility for ourselves, for our serenity. Even the rescuer learns that the true path towards serenity is through self-care, not through managing or fixing others, shaping others up in the way that we think they need to be, making sure our children turn out to be good citizens. Often the most painful feelings that we feel are the doorway into this work. We can learn to own and interrupt our own projections. The minute we just own our projections, we are, in a sense, taking them back. The outcome or the end result is intimacy. And many run away from it because intimacy requires authenticity, feeling uncomfortable and vulnerable. The reason I encourage people to come to the intensives, I often call our intensives a great place for the non-identified patient, is to practice being the identified patient. Become the identified patient in your own life. That's where the real freedom and power is. And understand that when I talk about the fact that parents are the principal cause of neuroses in their children, I am not doing it from a shaming place. It's just a fact. We have a huge impact on our children. Our parents had an enormous, immeasurable impact on us. And that doesn't lead to us condemning ourselves or the others. It just helps us understand what the work is. We can, as parents and spouses, where we have projected onto others, we can learn to take ownership of our own feelings in our life. We can make our serenity and our self-esteem our project instead of making it our child's responsibility or our spouse's. We can learn to walk in our own shoes, to not abdicate the chief responsibilities of our life onto others. We can learn that this process of somebody struggling in our family can bring us to greater joy and awareness than we ever imagined, that the treasures and the wisdom that come from embracing our part in the dynamic is really unspeakable. It's an unspeakable joy. And ultimately, as we do our work, the scapegoat is moved from the position in the family of scapegoat or identified patient to hero. They are the ones that brought us in to our undone work and the undone work of our ancestors. And this comes out of the courage, the safety, the willingness to consider that we might be contributing to the problem that upsets us. All right, folks. Like I mentioned earlier, my 2 books are available on Amazon and Audible. If you want to do a deep dive, and I cannot recommend it too strongly, December 3rd is the next offering. Emma Reedy June and her husband Jordan June are co-leading that. So if you want a fantastic master class in this work, December 3rd is that option. If you would like couples intensives or family intensives, you can go to our website or email us. If you want a coach or a therapist, if you want to attend the support group, if you're an alumni of our program and you want to attend the support group, go to our website or use the email info@findingyouprograms.com. If you want to join me at the Omega Institute, July 12th through 17th for the Audacity to Be You workshop, go to the Omega workshop website at eomega.org. That's eomega.org. I'll be back in 48 hours. For those of you that are inner circle members, if you're listening, if you're watching live, I'll be back for an Ask Me Anything episode this Thursday night, Thursday, November 20th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. I can take any questions then, anything that you want me to clarify related to this broadcast, or really anything that has to do with psychology, mental health, spirituality, healing, therapy, and so forth. So thanks for joining me. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. And as always, I think your attendance in listening to these podcasts is a sign that you have decided to take back responsibility for your life instead of abdicating that onto somebody who's really ill-equipped to hold it. So, for on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thanks for showing up to these, doing your work. It makes all the difference in the world. See you in 2 nights, November 20th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Have a great evening. Take care. Bye-bye.